Okay, so we are up to the two dots at the bottom of Yud Omid Beis. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Tanan Hasam. We learned over there. Shahaya Rabbi Kiva Omer. Rabbi Kiva used to say, Kol Domim Shenichnesu Lahechal Lachaperes Psulim. The halacha is carbon Chatas whose dam was brought in to the Hechal. It automatically makes the carbon possible. Now, Rabbi Kiva says that this halacha applies to any carbon whose dam was brought in to the heichal, it's possible. Now, Rashi points out the pasuk that says that dam that enters the heichal is possible is talking about a chatas. It says v'chol chatas asher yuva midama. But Rabbi Kiva is marbe all kaddish yikachim and all kaddishim kalim. In other words, all karbonis may ribuya the koil vichol. It says it could have said kol chatas ashayuva, but it says vikol chatas ashayuva to be marbe all karbonis whose dam didn't belong in the heichal and was brought there. It becomes possible. The chachamim don't darshan that. And they say it only applies to Chatas. And Rabbi Eliezer Eimer Afa Osham, it also applies to an Osham. Shenemar Kachatas Ka Osham. A Chatas has a din like an Osham. A Chatas is Hukash to an Osham. We had already the Hekesh of Chatas to Osham to teach us that an Osham that was Shechta Shaloi Lishma, it'll be possible just like a Chatas. Let me make sure my speaker's on. Rabbi Eliezer explains that the Osham is like the Chatos because there's a Hekesh that everyone seems to agree with of Kachatos Ka'osham. El Rabbanon, who say it only applies to a Chatos and not an Osham, my time mayu, what's their reason? As Rashi says, they have to hold to the Hekesh. Everybody holds to the Hekesh. So why aren't we makish and Osham to a Chatos to tell us that just like a Chatos, if it's dam entered into the Hechel, it's possible, so to the Osham as well. Zok Gemara Amarava Osham nichnas domay lefnim patzolay motasamid. You cannot make a hekesh lagabi this halacha of nichnas domay lefnim by an Osham. You know why you can't? Because it's impossible to say that if the dam of an Osham came lefnim, it should be possible. Because it's a kal v'chomer me'oila. We have a kal v'chomer from a carbon oila. And here's the kal v'chomer. Zok Gemara. Ma oila. Ma dechan oila. Turning on to daf. Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Ma dechan oila. Shehi kolil. That's totally burnt on the mizbeach. So it's a davar hachomer. Nevertheless, nichnas dama lefnim ksheira. If the dam of an oila was brought into the heichal, it will be kosher. Bein l'rabban, bein l'Rabbi Eliezer. Everybody agrees the dam of an oila that entered the heichal, it will still be kosher. So osham she'ena kolil, an osham that's not as chomer as an oila, because you don't burn all of it like kol shkein. Surely, if it was nichnas dam lefnim, it should be ksheira. Talk to Gemara. What's the raya? Mala oila. Maybe the reason why the oila nichnas dam lefnim is kosher. Shekeneinu mechaperes. The oila is not mechaper. It's not a carbon that's specifically made to be mechaper. But masha'inkin osham is mechaper. So maybe the osham's dam. Maybe if the osham dam comes in to the heichel, it should be possible. So Gemara minchas choyte yochiach. The mincha of a choyte. So we're talking about someone who was chayiv a chatos as a carbon oil of a and he's from Dalei Dalos. He only has money to bring a mincha. That mincha is definitely mechaper, but if the mincha is brought in to the heichol, it won't passel it. Minchas choyte yochiach. That it's mechaper, and it still doesn't become pom. Right, the Gemara. Why did the Gemara bring a chacha for minchas choyte where there's no dam at all? It's just flour. Chatas ha'oif v'leima chatas ha'oif techiach. Why didn't the Gemara say that chatas ha'oif techiach? That chatas ha'oif is mechaper, Yet, if its dam comes in to the heichal, it'll be kosher. Zok Gemara, because we don't know that it's kosher. Chatas oiv boy the Rav Avin. Chatas oiv Rav Avin himself had that shaila, and since he has that shaila, we don't know if chatas oiv is mechir, because maybe chatas oiv the dam is possible if it comes in today. Break the Gemara. V'lifroich. I'm sorry, the Bach takes out the word v'lifroich. Mala minchas choite shekein einay min zevach. What's the right from a minchas choite to an osham? Yes, a minchas choite doesn't become possible. It's not a min zevach. It's not a korban. It's not an animal. Oila is a korban, and it's going to be mutter. It's going to be kosher if the dam came in. An oila has a mila over a mincha because an oila is zevach, and a mincha has a mila over an oila because it's mechaper. So they each have their own individual symptoms, but tzar hashav shabahen, what do they all share? Shein koche kochim, they're both koche kochim, and if v'nichnas lifnim, we take out the word damon because a mincha doesn't have dam. V'nichnas lifnim ksherim. If the minchas choite was taken into the heichal, if the dam of an oila was taken into the heichal, the carbon would still be kosher. Afani avi osham shu kodesh kochim. So to osham, which is a kodesh kodeshim, v'nichnas damai lifnim, and its dam was brought into the heichal, kosher, that it will be kosher. So therefore, the Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer, and they say that we can't apply the hekesh of osham to chatos to say that if its dam came in lifnim, it'll be possible because we have a ma'atzad from oila and from minchas chatas. It's still not a raya from the tarashava because v'livroich mal tarashava shaben sai oila and sai mincha shekein ein lam kitzva. They don't have a shear. There's no shear as to what the minimum size of a mincha is, no, of the minimum cost of a mincha. Neither is there a shear for the minimum cost of an oila. Timer ba'osham sheyesh like kitzva. Osham has a minimum shear; it has to be worth 2 shekel. So therefore, maybe an osham will be possible if its dam comes in lafnai v'lafnim. Elahainu taimayu derabonon the yomar kra dama. It says dama by the chatas. Ashayuvami dama davka the dam of the chatas. Dama shalzu the dam of the chatas. Oloi dama shalach. Beidich, Rabbi Eliezer holds that it includes an osham as well. Dama v'loi b'sara. Dama tells you the dafka if the dam came in to the heichal will apostle the carbon. But if the buzzer of the chatos came into the heichal, it will not apostle the carbon. Beidich and the rabbanon dam dama. You learn 2 halachas. From the word dam v'loi buzzer, and dama v'loi dam shalacher. Beidich dam v'loi dorish. And Rabbi Eliezer holds you can't make that extra limud. Once it says dam, it makes sense that it say dama, and there's nothing extra here, and all you have is dam v'loi buzzer. So the Brisker Rav makes a beautiful diak from our Gemara. The Gemara uses as a symptom of an osham that makes it a chomer to a carbon. The fact that we should say that if its dam enters the heichal, it becomes possible. A symptom of it is a chomra because it has a kitzvah. So the Brisker Rav had a shaila. That the osham has a kitzvah is a minimum value that it has to have. Is that a din in the carbon? The carbon has to have a certain value, or is it a din in the bailim? In order for the bailim to be mekayim eschiyv to bring an osham, he has to lay out at least 2 more kesef. And there's different nafkaminas that the Brisker Rav players. One nafkamina is, what if he spent the money but he didn't get a good deal, and the carbon still doesn't have that value? If it's a din in him spending it, he's done that. But if it's a din in the carbon still doesn't have that value. So the Brisker Rav brings a eye from our Gemara that has nothing to do with the chiyuv of the bailim. It's a din in the carbon. Because if it was just a chiyuv for the bailim, why is that a chumrah in the carbon that would make it be possible if the dam was brought into the heichal? So from our Gemara, the Brisker Rav, you have a right that it's a din in the osham. The osham, in order for it to have its kedushas carbon, in order for it to work, for it to be effective, it has to be worth that minimum amount of 2 kesef. But but it has nothing to do with the responsibility of the Bible. Gewaltig. Let's see the Gemara by. Bishlam al Rabban. Dami Osham sheshachtu shaloi l'shmoi kosher. So now we're going back to our Mishnah, and we have a machlokes in our Mishnah. Osham sheshachtu shaloi l'shmoi. Is it kosher or not? So the Rabbanan said Dafka, the Chatas, and the Pesach that were shechted shaloi l'shmoi will be possible, but the Osham that was shechted shaloi l'shmoi will be kosher. Rabbi Eliezer said that the Osham is like the Chatas, just like the Chatas is Mechaper, the Osham is Mechaper, and the Osham that was brought Shaloi L'Shem, the right Bailam, will be possible. Or Shaloi L'Shem, the right carbon, or Shaloi L'Shem, the right Bailam. So Zok Gemara, Bishlama, if you're going to hold L'Rabbanan, Darmi Osham Sheshachtu Shaloi L'Shem Kosher, Hainu de Iskish Mincha L'Chatas Mincha L'Osham. We find a place in the Torah where the Mincha is compared to the Chatas, and the mincha is compared to the osham. So it has certain halachas that would be similar to that of a chatas, and it would have certain halachas that would be similar to that of a osham. So zok the Gemara, if it was as follows, the Tanya we learned, Rabbi Shimon Omer, it says about the mincha, kodesh kodeshim. The mincha is kodesh kodeshim, kechatos v'cha osham, like a chatos and like an osham. So how is a minchas chatas compared to a chatas? Minchas choite harei chatas lefichach komta shaloi l'shmach. Just like if you shecht or you do any of the avoidance of a carbon chatas, l'shem the wrong carbon, the carbon is possible. So too, if you take the kamitza of a mincha shaloi l'shma without the right kavanah for the right carbon, it will be psula. However, there's another type of mincha. There's a minchas nedava. Minchas nedava hareyu ka'asham. That'll be like an osham lefichach kamsa shaloi l'shmak sheva. So if you learn that an osham shaloi l'shmak sheva, then this hekesh makes sense. We're comparing the minchas choite to a chatos, and shaloi l'shmak will be possible, and we're comparing minchas nedava to an osham, and if you made the kmitah shaloi l'shmak will be kosher. Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that even in Osham Shaloi L'Shma is possible. L'mai hilchas ishkes mincha lechatas umincha l'osham. L'gabi what halacha are we comparing a mincha to a chatas and a mincha to an osham? If they both have the same halacha, we need to find a place where there'd be a difference between the chatas and the osham, and the minchas choite will sometimes take on the halacha of the chatas and sometimes take on the halacha of the osham. Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you what it's for. L'chi idich the Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon had another halacha that he learned, and there we agree that there's that distinction between an osham and a chatas. It's not. Shaloi b'kli shareis psula. What happens? The halacha is you bring the mincha all together in the kli shareis. Once you bring it in the kli shareis, the whole oil mixture with the flour, the kohen makes the kemitza, and what he's supposed to do is put the kemitza into another klei shareis to individually be makdish the kemitza, and in that second klei shareis they would take that to the mizbeach and then put the kemitza on the mizbeach. What if the kohen brought the kemitza to the mizbeach without putting the kemitza into a klei shareis? Shaloi b'klei shareis. He made the kemitza with his hands, and now he has it in his hand. He walks over to the mizbeach, he puts it on the mizbeach. He never placed the kemitza into a klei shareis. The halach is psula. That's what the chacham hold. But for Rab Shimon, who we're going to focus on, machshir. Rab Shimon is machshir. He holds that that is a kosher carbon, meaning you don't dafka have to put the kemitza in the klei shareis. However, there's a difference between the halacha of a carbon, mincha, if the kemitza is delivered by hand, versus if the kemitza is delivered in the klei shareis. My time is Rab Shimon. What is for Rab Shimon? Omar Kra, Shaitan Pasuk, Kodesh Kodeshim Hi, Kechatas V'Kasham. The minchas choite is kodesh kodeshim kechatas v'chasham. Bala oivda biyad. If you're going to deliver the kemitza by hand and you're not going to put it into a klei shareis, then oivda biyamin kechatas. Then you have to do it with your right hand. Everything has to be done with your right hand, like a chatas where the hazah is done with the right hand. Bala oivda b'chli. But if you decide that you want to deliver the kemitza in the klei shareis, then bismoil kashim, then you can even use your left hand, like a noshim where you just take the keli with the dam and you just spritz it, you just dump it on the mizbeach, you spritz it on the corner from the kli directly, it doesn't go on the finger of the kohen. And therefore, there's no akpada on yamin. So maybe that's the place where we can compare a mincha to a chatas and an osham. Lagabe, if you need yamin, if you use your hand, you need yamin. If you don't need your hand, you don't need yamin. For the Gemara, Rab Shimon said this halacha that you learn out of the hekesh, kechatas kasham, but he also said a different halacha, kechatas kasham, about lishma. So for the Gemara, Rab Shimon high kra mapek leilahaki umapek leilahaki. How could Rab Shimon learn two things out of the same pasuk? Zok the Gemara, Iker kra liched Rab Yehuda bereid Rab Chia Yehuda also. The main pasuk of the comparison from a mincha to a chatas and a osham is for the halacha of Rab Yehuda bereid Rab Chia, which we just discussed. That makes a distinction. If the mincha is brought in the hand, it has to be in the right hand, like a chatos. If it's brought in the keli, it could even be brought in the left hand, like an osham. That's really what the pasuk. So where is the real makar that Rab Shimon learns from, that a minchas chayta is possible if it's brought shaloi l'shma? Time achminu chatas time omai. Why is a regular korban chatas possible if it's shech l'shaloi l'shma? Dichsiv bahi. It says chatasi. That same nusach it says by a minchas chayta. Minchas chayta nami ksiv bahi. So since it says he, it tells you the same halacha. It has to be l'shma. That's how he knows that a minchas chayta has to be brought l'shma, but a minchas nedova does not have to be brought l'shma. Zokt Gemara ula Rabbanon. According to the Rabbanon, l'may hilchasa iskish osham lechatos. Zokt Gemara. According to the Rabbanon, let's have a look at Rashi. The Rabbanon the pligi alei the Rabbi Eliezer b'masnisen. The Rabbanon in our Mishnah who holds that dafka achatos is possible shaloi l'shma, but not an osham. So the Rabbanon the pligi alei the Rabbi Eliezer b'masnisen. According to the Rabbanon, freit the Gemara lemay hilchasa ishkis osham lechatos. So legabi what halacha is osham compared to chatos? Bishlam, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's to say that both of them, if they're brought shaloi l'shma, they're possible. But according to the Rabbanon, where an usher brought shaloi l'shma is kosher, legabi what halacha is the Torah comparing osham to chatos? Gemara loy malach machatas to unas smicha af osham to unas tal smicha. Just like a korban chatas, you need to make smicha and vidui. So too by an osham, it has the same requirement. That is the purpose of the hekesh. That's what we learn from there. Zok to Gemara weiter. Yosef ben Chuni Omer. In our Mishnah, Yosef ben Chuni said that Hanishchot, if something is shechted l'shem chatos and l'shem Pesach, that's going to be possible also. So not only is a chatos that was shechted shaloi l'shma, or a Pesach that was shechted shaloi l'shma, not only are they possible, but so too, if someone shechted any korban l'shem a chatos or l'shem a Pesach, it will also be possible. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Yosef ben Chuni Rabbi Eliezer Amru Davar Echad. This halacha that we learn in our Mishnah from Rabbi Yosef ben Chuni, that say any korban that you shech l'shem chatos and any korban that you shech l'shem Pesach will also be possible. Rabbi Eliezer agrees to this halacha, and we're going to now quote a Rabbi Eliezer where we know it from. Yosef ben Chuni we have in our Mishnah. Now we're going to see a Rabbi Eliezer that says the same thing. It's not going to be before it's going to be through a diak, and we're going to learn an interesting shaila that from it we will be able to be medayik Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Omar be'acherim l'shem chatos pligi. So Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Eliezer, who we're going to shortly illustrate, and Rabbi Yosef ben Chuni agree side by someone who shechted a korban l'shem chatos that it's possible, and say somebody who shechted a korban l'shem Pesach that it will be possible. However, Rabbi says that's not what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Rabbi Eliezer only says if you shechted l'shem Pesach, it's going to be possible. But if you shechted it l'shem chatos, it won't be possible. So Rabbi Omar ba'acherim l'shem chatos pligi. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yosy ben Chuni says clearly that any carbon that you shechted, sai l'shem Pesach, sai l'shem Chatas, it will be possible. But Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that. Rabbi Eliezer said, Dafka, if you shechted a carbon l'shem Pesach, it will be possible. But if you shechted a carbon l'shem Chatos, it will not be possible. Kidatanya, like we learned. HaPesach she'ovra shnosei. You have a carbon Pesach that can no longer be brought as a carbon Pesach because it's too old. It's past a year old. V'shachtoi bizmanoi. And it was, so that means it's a shlomim. You have a shlomim, and it was shechted bizmanoi, meaning it was shechted on Erev Pesach, during the time where you would normally shecht a carbon Pesach. Lishmoi, l'shem a carbon Pesach. V'chein, hashoichet acherem l'shem Pesach, or any other carbon that you shechted l'shem Pesach. So basically, either a Pesach Shabbos Nosoi is a code word for shlomim. So a shlomim that you shechted l'shem Pesach on Erev Pesach, and any other carbon that you shechted l'shem Pesach bismanoi. Rabbi Eliezer poisel. Rabbi Eliezer holds it's posel. Rabbi Yeshua machshir and Rabbi Yeshua's machshir. So before we go anywhere, here Rabbi Eliezer quite clearly says any carbon that was shechted l'shem Pesach is going to be posel. So that takes care of that part of the equation. Now we still have to find a makar where Rabbi Eliezer will hold, or maybe not hold, depending on Rabbah or Rabbi Yochanan. If you shechted any carbon l'shem Pesach, l'shem Chatos, would it be possible? So let's have a look at the conversation between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. And from the conversation, Rabbi Yochanan is going to be able to be medayik that Rabbi Eliezer holds, even if you shechted a carbon l'shem Chatos, it will be possible. And from the conversation, Rabbah will make a dik punkt verkehrt, that if another carbon was shechted l'shem Chatos, it will be kosher. And we're going to see how Rabbi Yochanan saw from this conversation what Rabbi Eliezer held and what Rabbah saw. So let's have a look. Rabbi Yeshua holds machshir. Rabbi Yeshua argues on the whole thing, and he holds even if you shecht another carbon l'shem Pesach like a shlomim, it will be kosher. Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm going to prove to you that I'm right and that you're wrong, and that shechting l'shem the carbon Pesach will not be possible. And listen to this kavachayim. In bishar yemois hashana she'enoi kosher l'shmoi acherim ksherim l'shmoi. If the rest of the year, where if you shechted a carbon Pesach l'shem carbon Pesach, it would be possible. Acherim ksherim l'shmoi. But if you shechted other karbanos l'shem those karbanos, they would be kosher. So therefore, bismanoi, when it's the right time to kosher l'shmoi, bismanoi when the Pesach is kosher if you shechted l'shmoi, einoi din sheyichsheru acherim l'shmoi, madich when you shechted a carbon Pesach, b'shar yemois hashana, it won't be kosher l'shmoi, where it's not kosher l'shmoi, because you can't shecht it for a carbon Pesach. Nevertheless, acherim ksherim l'shmoi, but a shlomim you could shecht l'shem shlomim. Bismanoi, where even shechting a carbon Pesach is kosher l'shmoi. Einoi din sheyichshiru acherim l'shmoi. So let's have a look at Rashi on this kavachaymer, an interesting kavachaymer. In Mishar Yemois Hashana, she'ena kosher l'shmoi. K'diyafin lo b'mesechus Pesachim, shachtu kodim chatzois, posel shenemar bein harabayim. If you shecht the carbon Pesach before chatzois, the carbon is going to be posel, because the time to shecht the carbon Pesach is after chatzois. The chama pa'amim shina kosev la'akev kviyas manoi biyodalad bein harabayim. So if you shechted a carbon Pesach, l'shem carbon Pesach, in the morning of Erev Pesach, it would be possible. Nevertheless, acherim ksherim l'shmoi. But if you shechted a shlomim, it would be kosher. There, belezer moidaboy. There, everybody agrees. Deloy polog ela bismanoi kidetanyo behedya. The only machloikis as to whether or not shechting a shlomim l'shem Pesach will be possible is only at the right time, but the rest of the time it wouldn't work. So now let's look at this kal v'chomer again inside. In b'shar yemois hashana, So Rashi is one Shari Moshe Hashanah referring to. It's referring to Erev Pesach in the morning, before the time to shech the carbon Pesach is. So in B'Shari Moshe Hashanah, she'ena kasher l'shmoi. If you shechted a carbon Pesach, l'shem carbon Pesach, it would be possible. Nevertheless, acherim ksherim l'shmoi. If you shechted a shlomim in that time, it would be kosher. Bismanoi, if you shechted the carbon Pesach at the right time, to kosher l'shmoi, we're shechting it l'shem carbon Pesach would be kosher. Einai din sheyichshu acherim l'shmoi. Surely, if you shechted a shlomim l'shem Pesach, it should also be kosher. Because even in the place where shechting it l'shem Pesach is possible, shechting it l'shem shlomim is kosher. Kol shekein, if you shechted it l'shem Pesach, it will be kosher. Kol shekein, if you shechted it l'shem shlomim, it should be kosher. So Rabbi Shua brought a raya that shechting is shlomim l'shem Pesach bismanoi will be kosher, which is not like what Rabbi Eliezer said. Amal Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer told him, with your logic, I could prove to you something that you know is wrong. So clearly your logic can't be right. Because maybe manipulate your Kal V'chomer and look at it from a different perspective, and the conclusion that you'll get is it doesn't make any sense. And here's what you could say. Uma'im b'shar Yemos Hashana, she'ene kosher l'shmoi, madich by shar Yemos Hashana, where it's not kosher to shecht a carbon Pesach l'shmoi. Nevertheless, kosher hu l'shem acherim, it will be kosher if you shechted it l'shem Pesach. So if you l'shem shlomim, so if you shechted a carbon Pesach b'shar Yemos Hashana, so let's say erev Pesach in the morning, if you shechted it l'shem Pesach, it would be possible, but l'shem shlomim it will be kosher. Bismanoi erev Pesach in the afternoon, shu kosher l'shmoi, where it would be kosher if you shechted it l'shem Pesach. Einai din sheyuchsher l'shem acherim. Surely it should be kosher if you shechted it l'shem shlomim. Madach, when you shechted it l'shem Pesach, it's possible it'll be kosher if you shechted it l'shem shlomim. So if when you shechted it l'shem Pesach, it's kosher. Kosher when you shechted l'shem shlomim, it should be kosher. And based on this Kal V'chomer, v'yuchsher Pesach barba asor shaloi l'shmoi. That's going to conclude by saying that if you shechted a carbon Pesach l'shem shlomim on erev Pesach during the proper time for shechita, it would be kosher, and we know it's not kosher. The kach ato imerli, and this is the Kal V'chomer you want to make for me. That's going to lead to a conclusion that we know is false. The Gersa sticks it in. There's another problem with the Kal V'chomer. Huchshur acherim b'shar Yemos Hashana. I'm sorry. The kach ato imerli. Now, the next guy is void mali huchshur acherim b'shar Yemos Hashana l'shmoi. You know why? You know why? If other karbanos were shechted l'shem Pesach b'shar Yemos Hashana, they'll be kosher. Shekein hu kosher l'shem acherim, because it's also kosher b'shar Yemos Hashana to shech the Pesach l'shem acherim. And because of that, the yuchshu acherim bismanoi l'shmoi shekein hu pasol l'shem acherim. Don't bring me your Kal V'chomer, because you know why. When it's not the Zman Pesach, it's kosher if you shechted something l'shem Pesach. You know why it's kosher? Because there, if you shechted a Pesach l'shem shlomim, it would be kosher. So don't bring me a raya to the Zman Shchitas Carbon Pesach, to erev Pesach in the afternoon, where if you shechted it shaloi l'shmoi, it will be possible. So there as well, shechting a shlomim l'shem Pesach should be possible as well. So that's Rabbi Eliezer obstok to Rabbi Yeshua's Kal V'chomer. Now we have to take a pause for a second, because look at this last point that Rabbi Eliezer just made. Let's have a look at it. Mali huchshuru acherim b'shar Yemos Hashana l'shmoi. You know why? If you shechted a shlomim l'shem Pesach the rest of the year, you know why it's kosher? Shekein hu kosher l'shem acherim, because the rest of the year, if you shechted the carbon Pesach l'shem shlomim, it would be kosher. V'yuchshu acher bizmanoi l'shmoi. How could you suggest that bizmanoi, if you shechted a shlomim l'shem Pesach, which should be kosher, how could you say that? Shekain hu posel l'shem acher. If at this time, Erev Pesach in the afternoon, if you shechted a carbon Pesach l'shem shlomim, it would be posel. So therefore, reason dictates that if you shechted a shlomim l'shem Pesach in that same period of time, it should also be posel. So you see in this comment that Rabbi Eliezer made, you see that he's creating a link. If you were shechting the carbon Pesach Shaloi L'Shema, it would be possible. That's reason why if you shechted another carbon L'Shem Pesach, it would also be possible. So if that's his reasoning, then we can apply the same svar to Chatas. A Chatas, no matter when you shecht it, if you shechted it L'Shem some other carbon, the Chatas is possible. So therefore, reason should dictate that if you shecht any other carbon l'shem the Chatos, it should be possible. So this is where Rabbi Yochanan was medaik from. Rabbi Yochanan was focused on this comment that Rabbi Eliezer made, and from this comment that Rabbi Eliezer made in reference to a carbon Pesach that linked whether or not another carbon that was shechted l'shem the Pesach, it's linked to whether or not the carbon Pesach shechted shaloi l'shema being possible. If you're making that link, then that link should equally apply to a carbon Chatos, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer assumes from here, Rabbi Yochanan assumes from here that Rabbi Eliezer holds, say any carbon that you shechted l'shem Chatos, say any carbon that you shechted l'shem Pesach, Bizman Pesach, will be possible. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. Let's continue on this conversation. Rabbi Yeshua disagrees. He holds that a carbon that was shechted l'shem Pesach would not be possible. So Amalei Rabbi Yeshua, Im Kain, based on your shita, Rabbi Eliezer, that a shalomim shechted l'shem Pesach is going to be possible. Im Kain hurata koyach Pesach v'nosata koyach shlomim, koyach b'shlomim. The way you understand it, a carbon Pesach is less chomer than a carbon shlomim. We know the Torah specifies dafka by the carbon Pesach, it has to be l'shema, not by the carbon shlomim. But the way you have it set up, the shlomim is actually going to be more chomer than the carbon Pesach. How is that? Zokt Rashi, because hoyrata koyach Pesach v'nesat the koyach b'shlomim. Shekol hashana sheizman shlomim, all year round, where it's the time to shech l'shlomim, Pesach hanishchat l'shem shlomim would be kosher. All year round, if you took a carbon Pesach and you shechted it l'shem shlomim, that would be a kosher carbon shlomim. But if you look at the time that's designated for the carbon Pesach, vayoim shuzman Pesach, but on erev Pesach, kol shlomim hanishchatin l'shmoi would be psulin. A shlomim that you shechted l'shem Pesach would be possible. So kum techais, the shlomim is more chomer than the Pesach, because the Pesach that you shechted during this man of shlomim, l'shem shlomim, would be kosher. Yet the shlomim that you shecht during this man of Pesach, for Pesach, will be possible. And that's not logical, because we all agree that the Torah says that you need a l'shema by a Pesach, not by a shlomim. But based on what you're saying, the shlomim is going to be more chomer than the Pesach. So therefore Rabbi Yeshua rejected Rabbi Eliezer's argument. So Chazer Rabbi Eliezer v'danu dinacher. So Rabbi Eliezer came with another taina to prove that the shlomim that was shechted l'shem carbon Pesach on the erev Pesach should be possible. And this is what he said: Motzinu moiser Pesach boshlam. We know that the leftover carbon Pesach that weren't brought automatically morph into a carbon shlom. But the ein moiser shlomim ba Pesach, never does a carbon shlomim morph into a carbon Pesach. So therefore, Uma Pesach, Shemoisroi, Bosh Lomim, Madach Pesach, which is kuladik, because its leftovers will automatically morph into a shlomim. Nevertheless, Shachdoi Bizmanoi L'Shum Shlomim Pasul, if you shecht it, so the Pesach is kuladik, it morphs into a shlomim. Yet, if you shecht it Bizmanoi L'Shum Shlomim, if you shecht it on there Pesach in the afternoon L'Shem Shlomim, Pasul, the carbon Pesach would be possible. Shalomim, which is even more chomer than Pesach, because she'ein moishron ba Pesach. Its leftovers don't morph into a korban Pesach. Im shachtam l'shem Pesach bizmanoi. If it was shacht l'shem Pesach bizman Pesach, einoi din shiyu psulin. Surely it should be possible. So this is another argument that Rabbi Eliezer suggested. Omar, let's turn on Talmud Beis. Let's see Rabbi Yeshua's response. Omar Rabbi Yeshua, I don't like that tiny either. You know why? Because the fact that Moiser Pesach morphs into a Shlomim wouldn't, and Moiser Shlomim do not morph into a Pesach, that doesn't explain why shechting the Shlomim L'Shem Pesach should be possible. Because I'll show you an example. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, what about Moiser Chatas? Matzinu Moiser Chatas ba'oila. We know a leftover Chatas morphs into an oila. And if you remember, it's not in the standard case, because a leftover Chatas is a Chatas HaMeis. The only time a Chatas will morph into an oila is if someone set aside two animals, one as a backup, and he used one animal, the backup now gets sold, and they wait till it gets a mum, it gets sold, and then they buy an oila with it. So that's the case where the Chatas will morph into an oila. So matinu moiser Chatas ba'oila, but then moiser oila b'chatas. You never find an excess oila being brought as a Chatas. So I could make the same argument then, and I could say, so Rabbi Yeshua tells Rabbi Eliezer, based on your argument to justify why shechting a shlomim l'shem Chatas will be possible, based on that argument, shechting an oila l'shem Chatas should also be possible. Uma Chatas shemoisher ba'oila shechting l'shem oila psula oila she'ein moisher ba'chatas shechting l'shem Chatas and it didn't shetei psula. So let's think about it. Well, isn't that exactly what we're saying Rabbi Eliezer holds? That Rabbi Yochanan said Rabbi Eliezer holds. That's exactly what he said. That sai shechting any carbon l'shem Pesach and sai shechting any carbon l'shem Chatas will be psula. So this is perfect. But that's not what Rabbi Eliezer answered. So Rabbi said it must be, since Rabbi Eliezer didn't say, yeah, well, that's what I hold. I hold taka that an oil l'shem Chatas will be psula. Rabbi Eliezer didn't say that. So it proves that Rabbi Eliezer holds that an oil l'shem Chatas is not possible. So now we have the diyukim where Rabbi Yochanan was medayik from the first argument of Rabbi Eliezer that an oil l'shem Chatas would be psula, and Rabbi was medayik from this discussion over here that Rabbi Eliezer would agree that oil l'shem Chatas is ksheira. So let's go on with this conversation. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer responded to Rabbi Yeshua, Lo yim amrit b'chatas. From a chatas, it's not a raya. You know why? Because the reason why someone shechting an oil l'shem chatas will be kosher is sheken ksheira l'shma kol hashana kula. The carbon chatas has a kula. All year long, you can shecht it l'shma and it'll work. Tamer b'Pesach that has a chumrah. Shein kosher l'shmoi ela b'zmanai. You can't shecht a Pesach anytime like you could a chatas. You could only shecht it l'shma only during the designated time period, Erev Pesach in the afternoon. And therefore, hoyel vu pasal l'shmoi, since there's even a time where you could check the carbon Pesach l'shmoi and it will be possible, dinu sheyivsalu acherem l'shmoi. Therefore, it's justified to say that if you shechted a shlomim or an oila l'shem Pesach, it will be possible. But we couldn't justify that by a chatos, because a chatos, whenever you shechted l'shmoi, it'll be a kosher. Okay, Zog to Gemara weiter. Shimon Achai Azariah. Shimon Achai Azariah said that the only time a carbon is possible shaloi l'shma if it was shaloi l'shma to a carbon that's on a lesser level, but to a carbon that's on a higher level, even shaloi l'shma will be kosher. So Zog to Gemara Rab Ashi Masni Mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan, Rab Acha Rava Masni Mishmeid Rabbi Yanai. So the question is, what is the source of the halacha that we're about to share? My time of the Shimon Achai Azariah. What is the svara of Shimon Achai Azariah? And we learned Shimon Achai Azariah, the reason why he's called the brother of Azariah, because Azariah was his wealthy brother who supported him. So he gets the credit for his Torah. What's the svara? Why, if you have kavanah to a higher carbon, it's going to be kosher? The Yomakra, the Pesach says, V'lo yichalu eskache b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu l'Hashem. it will not be mechalal a carbon if you're going up. V'lo yechalu as kachei b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu l'Hashem. It will not be mechalal a carbon if you go up. B'mura mahen ein mischalal. If you have kavanah to a higher level carbon, it will not be mechalal the carbon. But b'namuch mahen, but if you have kavanah for a lower level carbon, mechalalin, it will be mechalal. Frank the Gemara, that's not what this pasuk is for. We need it to tell us halacha from Shmuel. How do we know if someone eats tevel? He's chayiv misa. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, "V'lo yichalus kachim b'nei Yisrael es asher yarimu l'Hashem." They should not be mechalel kachim b'nei Yisrael, that they will eventually be mafresh. So we're talking about something that you were not mafresh. Basidim litra makosav medaber. The pasuk is talking about tevel before you were mafresh shumas and maishris. Now, how do you know that there's a chiv misa? Because it says v'lo yechalu over here by this produce that is pre harama, and it says aloshen lo yechalu by truma, where it says that where the pasuk says umesu by ki yechalalu, and we learn just like by truma, if someone if a zori truma is chayiv misa, so too if someone eats tevel is chayiv misa. Zok to Gemara, but we still could learn our limit out of it as well. Because it became lichtay krash or hormu. To just teach us our limud that going up doesn't passel, it could have said v'lo yichalu as kachim b'nei Yisrael asher hormu. That was in the past separated. My asher yorimu. Why did the Torah express this in a lashon of the future? Shmami notarti, we could learn both halachas out. So now we have halacha. If it went up a madrega, it will be kosher. So when Shimon HaChayazari said it will be kosher, what does he mean? Does he mean ksherin be'ein meratzen? It means it's kosher, but it's not meratza. So it's just like the other karbanos when you shech l'shalei l'shema v'chipolu b'chada, and you know where he's arguing. He's not arguing if you upgrade it, because the Tanakama also agree. Every carbon, if you shech l'shalei l'shema, it's kosher and it's not meratza. The machlokes is, what if it was a downgrade? If it's a downgrade, Shimon HaChayazari holds it's completely possible. And that's the machlokes. V'chipligi b'chada polig, oidilma ksherin umaratzen. Maybe what Shimon HaChayazari is saying is if you had the wrong kavanah and you had kavanah to a higher carbon, not only will it be kosher, but it will also be meratza l'bayil l'shem chayva. And now b'tardipli. Now he's arguing in two halachas. He's arguing in a case where you had kavanah to a higher level carbon, where the Chachamim say it's a kosher carbon, but it's not meratza, and Shimon HaChayazari says it is meratza. And if you had kavanah to a lesser carbon, where Shimon HaChayazari says it's possible, and the Rabbanan say it's kosher, but it's not meratza. So that is the shayla. Omer Abaye v'temer Abzreika Toshma. Let's see if we can prove it. The Mishnah gave an example of an upgrade or a downgrade. And there was Habachor v'Amaizer sheshachton l'shem shlomim, and shlomim is an upgrade from Bechor and Maizer. The halach is ksherim; they're kosher. Shlomim sheshachton l'shem Bechor l'shem Maizer will be psulim. Now, in the case where it's kosher, where you shechted the Bechor l'shem shlomim, it doesn't say meratzin; it just says ksherim. And the reason why it's not meratza is because by Bechor there is no ritzui. The Bechor is born Kodesh Merechem, and it's brought as a carbon. It has nothing to do with its owner. There's no ritzui required by the owner. If it got lost or got killed, the owner doesn't have to be mashlim. So there is no ritzui. So the example that the Mishnah gave of an upgrade was upgrading a Bechor to a Shlomim where there is no ritzui. So v'yikosh tonkadaitach ksherin umaratzin, if the Tana is telling us that not only will it be kosher, but it'll also be maratza, Bechor bar ritzuyahu, it would have been, it's a very bad example. The fact that Tana picked Bechor as the example clearly shows that he's trying to tell us that it's not maratza, it's just as kosher. Elo ksherin ve'ein maratzin. And therefore, with the Sefer ksheir ve'ein maratzin, since the Sefer, which is the case of Bechor that we just quoted, it's only kosher ve'ein maratzin, Reisha nami ksherin ve'ein maratzin, and the Reisha said that if you shechted a kodeshim kalim, l'shem kodshim kodshim. We'll have to say also it's kosher ve'ein maratzin, similar to what the halacha is in the Sefer. Zok Gemara Midi area. Who said that you compare the two? Maybe Hachadisa, Vachadisa. The Reisha is the Reisha, the Sefer is the Sefer. And in the Reisha, it's even going to be Meratza. Zok to Gemara, Elamai Kamash Malon, Gevoya V'nomach, Kamash Malon. If you're telling me that it's not Meratza, if you're going to tell me that it is Meratza, and you cannot bring a diuk from the case of Bechor, so then why Bechlal do the Tana quote the case of Bechor? We already have the case of Kodesh Kochim Kalam. Why don't we need the case of Bechor for? It's not just to give me an example of Gvoya V'nomach, because Tanina, we had the first case of our Mishnah gave us an example of a Gvoya V'nomach. Ketzat Kodesh Kochim Sheshachtim L'Shem Kochim Kalam. So why would I need this second example of Bechor? It must be to tell you that it's not Meratza. Zok Gemara, no, you don't have a raya. Maybe when you're dealing with such a big difference between one and the other, that's called Gavoya V'Nam. That's where we say that if you had in mind from Kachim to Kachim Kalam, it would be kosher. But from Kachim Kalam down to Kachim Kalam will be possible. Aval Kalam Kalam. But if you mixed up two karbonis that are both Kadeshim Kalam, like Shlomim and Bechor, there's too subtle a difference in between them. Maybe loy. Maybe that wouldn't be considered an upgrade or a downgrade. And that's the Chiddush. But not to tell us that it's not Meratza. Zok Gemara, I don't need a Mishnah for that. Hanami Tanina. We already know that Shlomim and Bechor are on two levels because we have a Mishnah later on that tells us that. Shlomim koidim is Bechor, mipnei shein tunin matnas arva usmicha unusachim utanuvas chazav v'shoy. Zok to Gemara, that's not a kash. Ha'ikr, in our Mishnah is where it belongs. The halacha that there's differences between different levels of even Kadeshim Kalim, that our Mishnah tells us. The Mishnah later says it as well. Hahi agror nasva. There, the Mishnah is just quoting it agavorcha, but it's not the main focus of the Mishnah there. By us, it's the main focus of the Mishnah, and therefore you don't have a raya at the end to be Pashat or Shaila, whether or not it will be Meratza. According to Shimon HaChayazaya, if you did an upgrade, if you had kavanah for a higher level carbon, we don't have a raya whether or not it will be Meratza. Okay, I'm going to just do the Mishnah. 6:30 is Slichas, 6:22 now, so we'll just do a couple more minutes. Zoktei Lega Mishnah. HaPesach sheshachtoi. Let me just look at the base. Bishachris biyodalit. Now we know you're only supposed to shech the carbon Pesach beiner abayim in the afternoon. What if you shechted the carbon Pesach in the morning, but shaloi l'shmoi? You shechted it l'shem shlomim. Now the question is, we know it's only possible if you shechted Pesach l'shem shlomim bizmanoi. Shaloi bizmanoi, anyway to shlomim. So what happens if when you shechted it, it was the 14th day in the morning? Is that called bizmanoi? Zok Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua machshir. Rabbi Yeshua holds it's kosher. You know why? Because that's not called bizmanoi. The Erev Pesach in the morning is no different than Yud Gimel Adar. Ki ilu nishchat b'shloisha asar. It's as if you shechted it on the 13th day of Nisan. It's not as man Pesach, and therefore if you shechted it shloi l'shmoi, meaning you shechted it l'shem shlomim, it's going to be a kosher carbon. Ben b'seira poisel. Ki ilu nishchat ben arbaim. Ben b'seira considers Erev Pesach in the morning as the Zman Shchita, and therefore if you shechted a carbon Pesach during the right time to shech the carbon Pesach, and you shech it at Shlomim, it will be possible. Omar Shimon ben Asai. Mekubal ani mipi shivim ushnayim zoke. I was makabel from 72 zkenim. B'yoyim she'yeshivu es Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah b'yeshiva. The day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva. Shekol Zevachim hanecholim, any Zevachim that could be eaten, any karbanos that you eat, shenizbechu shaloi l'shmon, that were shechted shaloi l'shmon, ksheyerin ela shaloi alu l'bai l'mishum chayta. Chutz min ha-Pesach u'min ha-Chatas. Now, what's the difference between this Rabbanan and the Rabbanan we had in the first Mishnah that said any carbon that you shechted shaloi l'mishum bailam will be kosher? The difference is this is only speaking about karbanos that you could eat. So what is it excluding? It's excluding the carbon oila. L'hoizet ben Azai ela ha'oila. Ben Azai is saying that oila is not like every other carbon that shechting at Shalei Shema will be kosher. Rather, the oila gets grouped together with the Pesach and the Chatos that if shechted at Shalei Shema will be possible. But v'loy hadu loy chachamim, the chachamim were not moide to Ben Azai, and they held that the oila shechted Shalei Shema would be kosher. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. For this week, we're going to be starting at 5:30. We have long blutter and we have early slichas. Slichas is 6:30, so we're going to have to start at 5:30. Okay, everybody should have an awesome day and an easy fast.
Right.